give it better data, give it better processors, and we don't really see a limit on where it's going to go as long as those two things increase. That's the fun of going open source on your models, is even though we might be creating our own foundation model that we like to share and hopefully people can use as a tool and build off of, the data set itself, we have no idea how that's going to be used. They find their picture on Have I Been Trained and they're like, you have my picture, get rid of it.
Mike Ryder Deeptalk. Menschen, Business, Diskussionen. Der Sprecher-Podcast. Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of Mike Ryder Deeptalk. Today I have a guest from America, so this episode is going to be in English. Kurt Paulsen from Spawning.ai is my guest. Kurt is a multimedia artist specialized in film and photography, and he is a college and university professor. He's teaching film production at the Minnesota State University and motion graphics at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. Apart from that, he is the lead animator and media and education consultant for Spawning.ai. As an artist, he's specialized in the intersection of AI, art, and education. Welcome to the show, Kurt.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Hey, happy to have you. Thank you for taking your time. Can you tell me a bit more about yourself as an artist, who you are, how you got there?
Sure. So my initial round of creativity came in the form of filmmaking. So I wanted to get into that early on, and I was doing a lot of work in the broadcast industry and kind of landed in After Effects, but I was an aspiring filmmaker who had a taste for the digital and the manipulative side of the editing process. So then I became the de facto specialist in all of my productions for that, which was my first teaching job was motion graphics. I started teaching before I even graduated. So now I'm moving into the motion graphics space. That's what I did my graduate work in. So I've always had an interest in stop motion animation. I'm a very crafty guy. So I like puppet making, set building, all of the kind of hands-on crafts. And then I like photography. So all of these things kind of meld together. And I spent probably a decade of my educational career really focusing students on music videos, because that was a space where all of the different techniques could play and the content could be very flexible. So it was a great place for students to be able to show off. So we would reach out to agencies in Nashville and see if they had artists who were looking for music videos. And then we would partner with outside clients to actually produce those music videos. So I almost consider myself a music video director for the last 10 years. And then moving more into the AI space, I've always been really, really interested in surrealism. Like that has been my kind of back end of everything I make. I would like to do experimental film more than I like to do traditional drama. And looking into surrealism and all the different automatic processes, the historical automatic processes, automatic drawing, exquisite corpse, fumage, where they use the smoke from a candle to create the marks on the paper, things like this, ways to remove your conscious control of the process to see what comes out on the other side. This seemed like the logical progression of that instinct. So maybe 5 years ago, before Stable Diffusion or Midjourney or anything like that came out, I was working with a developer friend, and we started working on creating our own kind of machine learning paint program. So it's essentially like a clickable region area of Stable Diffusion, but you could only like work in a small region of the image at a time, and you would prompt it and generate that chunk. So it's still all based on the same kind of clip technology that we're using today, but it was pre all of that stuff. So I was trying to find the surrealism in this, trying to find the subconscious. So like my computer was my subconscious, and then I was kind of collaborating with the computer, bouncing back and forth. And for me, that was very rewarding. I didn't feel like I was taking any shortcuts because it actually took a lot longer, but I was discovering things that I've never discovered otherwise because of that. And so now I moved more into spawning because that's the ethical side of things. Again, knew some people on development team, and what they're trying to do makes a lot of sense for what I'm trying to do, which is connected to education, connected into a way that students can feel like they're doing things without plagiarizing. In the educational world, there's a large concern for our authenticity. for creating content that is not infringing on anything, not breaking any laws. So what Spawning is working on with respect to rights owners made a lot of sense for me. So and then now here I am.
Wow, I mean that's really fascinating because I have many questions. First,
Sorry.
what? No worries. I really appreciate it because we know each other from a different context, and I didn't know that. That's why I asked you this first question, where you're coming from arts wise. But what did become of that program where the obviously stable diffusion and the other guys beat you to it?
Well, yeah, they took it and ran with it. And in those early days, all of this stuff was happening basically in Discord chats. And
Hmm.
some of the founders of Midjourney, before that was launched, were actually kind of just dropping in and observing some of these things. So, like, it was a very interesting space because everybody's trying to figure it out. It was something that
Hmm.
nobody really had a fix on. So
Hmm.
it was a small group of people. That's where we met Matt and Holly, who are our founders of Spawning. They were
Hmm.
exploring the same type of space, looking for what people were doing. So that program that we made was, and it still exists. We could spin it up and run it. It was a locally running machine. Um,
Hmm.
and it was interesting because it had a very different look than anything that we would have now. I
Hmm.
actually, it took a long time, but I went and took all of the photos that I would then manipulate. So I had a bunch of different models and I had them pose in all kinds of different ways. Then I arranged all of those models, so separated them in Photoshop, arranged them into a much larger composition, 30, 40 figures. And then I created a kind of a Hieronymus Bosch landscape using all of these figures as my kind of surrealist piece. Anyway, then I turned that into a big 30-inch canvas Giclée print. I always forget how to pronounce that, Giclée. But it looks like an oil painting. It looks great, and that's one of my pieces in the past where I can say I can pluck that out of the timeline before AI,
Hmm.
after Photoshop. It's just kind of like this very narrow window of about a year where that thing
Hmm.
was really interesting and relevant. So I still love it.
Hmm. Yeah, in German we call that kind of a Brückentier, so an evolutionary step in between two major technologies in this case. So it feels like that what you're describing. So very interesting. Yeah, because yeah, we actually, full disclosure, we know each other from my work from with UVA and your work with Spawning AI on opt out and in this case, data protection from your copyrighted works. Um, can you tell us a bit more about Spawning? Because in Europe, it's not that well known. Spawning AI. What are you guys? Who are you? What are you doing?
I think people probably know the name Have I Been Trained much more than they know the name Spawning. So Spawning
Hmm.
is the startup that is a small team of developers, people like me, who are putting together some products that are trying to respect rights and give people tools to respect those rights. So Have I Been Trained was the first product launch. It was a free service, and that was the first push by Spawning to bring rights management, to bring awareness to the public about what machine learning means, what data sets are. Like, people had no idea what a data set was. People had no
Hmm.
idea where this AI tool got its material from. And so it was kind of a pulling back the curtain a little bit and showing what was in the Lion 5B data set, which is a huge data set, but because it's so big, that was commonly used. So that was what informed Stable Diffusion and others.
Hmm.
And so they went to Stable Diffusion and said, if we find people who don't want to be included in your next iteration, would you respect that? And they said, yes. Okay, we will respect that. If you don't want to be in our next pass when we train our next round, we will respect those opt-outs. So we have millions of opt-outs right now. The latest round of Stable Diffusion, I want to say, was 7 million images that were not included. So that's a large chunk. It's a
Mhm.
small piece of 5 billion, but it's still a large chunk that people were able to extract from the data set that they didn't want in the next round. So Spawning's mission has always been that, to kind of advocate for the artists, advocate for the common creative who wants to have some kind of control without being swept up into larger AI models. So that was our
Mhm.
initial round, and then we came up with um, other tools that basically support that. AI.text was one of those tools, and that is just simply a script that you can use as a plugin in your WordPress site. We had a WordPress plugin for it, but you could use it on other sites too if you wanted to add it manually. And that was
Mhm.
simply if you know anything about robots.txt, which was trying to prevent data mining robots from coming and scraping your site, AI.text was simply an addition to that, saying if you are an ethical AI trainer and you know that AI.text exists, you will respect that and pass over that site and not include it. So
Mhm.
going from that, now we wanted to create. So those were kind of what I call the stick, but then we also needed to create the carrot, trying to regulate the industry by putting in lots of limits and guardrails. We should still be trying to do that, but ultimately that's not going to change the overall trajectory of things. We're
Mhm.
seeing a lot of innovation right now. The recent release of the Chinese model DeepSeek, which is cheaper and has a completely different learning method. Its logic is completely different than, say, ChatGPT. So that kind of innovation that's coming out is not going to be hindered by a lot of regulation, because people are finding loopholes. The new products redefine themselves, and then becomes difficult for legislation to pin it down. So the
Mhm.
idea is, with our latest product, Source Plus, is to try to create an alternative to using a model that was trained on content that was included without consent, to create a way to use generative AI while also respecting rights. So you know that the entire model has only been trained on copyright-free content. So that would be
Mhm.
public domain or CC0, Creative Commons 0.
Okay, well, again, many questions. First of all, because you mentioned it last, can you explain what CCO content means?
So the public domain would be typically anything that goes back, um, and I think it changes per jurisdiction. I think in the US it's 70 years or 75 years.
Mhm.
Not exactly sure on that. Essentially, if your work gets old enough, it goes
Mhm.
into the public domain. If there's no estate or trust or anything that's renewing those rights, it goes into the public domain, meaning it's just so old, there's nobody around to own it anymore, so anybody can use it. So if you think
Mhm.
about Renaissance masters, those paintings are all in the public domain. Da Vinci can't sue anybody. So there's all of that kind of content goes into the public domain. And a
Mhm.
lot of that is actually released by museums who have them in their collections. So some of that is public domain, but the photo of the artwork isn't. So we had to work with specific museums, because if I went and took a picture of the Mona Lisa is in the public domain, but my particular photograph of it is my photograph. So if you're
Mhm.
trying to train on these images, you have to find publicly released content from museums. So the museum takes high quality images of various artworks, historical artifacts, all of those types of things. And then they will release it as CC0. Creative Commons 0 is essentially saying, I am waiving my rights. I am voluntarily putting this out there. So I'm labeling my license on this object as free for any use, commercial or otherwise. Anybody can
Mhm.
do anything they want with this. And I am consciously, willingly putting it there. So that's
Mhm.
on the owner to put it into CC0, whereas public domain kind of happens by default.
Mhm. Okay, so CCO or CC0 would be the equivalent of a conscious opt-in so to speak. Like,
Yes.
I want, please have at it, do what you like, and
A good example is Wikimedia. So in
mhm,
Wikimedia, people can upload photos, and as soon as they upload photos to that site, they are waiving their rights. They're trying to create a kind of community collective of images that people can use for whatever they want. So there's some very passionate people about those type of communities, and they go out and take their photos and willingly upload them so that there's this kind of open resource for people to use. So the Creative Commons has a range of different licenses that you can use. Some are you can use it, but you can't use it for commercial purposes or things like that.
mhm.
There's a wide variable on there with all kinds of conditions. But CC0 is just the blank slate. I'm giving up my rights to it. Do what you will.
Okay, cool. And you trained a foundation model on that, basically, or
We
are
are
about to.
training right now a
You're
foundation
training
model
right
on
now.
that.
Mm,
Yes.
mm.
Uh,
So you created a data set that is fair trade, so to speak, ethical, and as you said, public domain and CC0, and are training a foundation model with that at the
yes.
moment.
Right. So the first thing we released was the PD12M. So that was a data set we released on Hugging Face. So that would be the 12 million images with all of the captions. So when you're training a new image model, you have to have the text and the picture. You can't have a generative AI system without having that linked information of text and image. So
Mhm,
that because it needs to know, what am I looking at? The
mm,
caption, the description is telling the the training software that this is what you're looking at, and then it can work its way down from there. So there's a bunch of different data sets out there that people can train from. PD12M is just a little bit unique in that it's really high quality images. We curated it. We brought it down from 40 million down to 12 million because we got rid of duplicates. We got rid of all of the really low res stuff. We scored thing. We use what's called an aesthetic score, so it can rank as far as like what makes a good looking image. So we don't have the random shots of the floor that somebody accidentally took, things like that. So that creates a very high quality data set. And in AI, it is very much garbage in, garbage out. So you want to make sure that you have as high quality of content going into it as you can. And
mm,
that data set can then be downloaded and used by anybody else to train a foundation model. We're working on one of our own, but because that data set has been released, and people can go out now and use that data set to download all 12 million images and then train their own model, we're just really curious to see who else is going to start playing with it, who else is going to start innovating with it. Um, that's the fun of going open source on your models, is even though we might be creating our own foundation model that we like to share and hopefully people can use as a tool and build off of, the data set itself, we have no idea how that's going to be used. That's
mm.
I'm very curious how it's going to be used, but we don't know yet who's going to use it or how it's going to be used. But hopefully it gets used a lot, because that's a much more ethical data set than some of the others.
Yeah, that's what I like about it too. Like, on the one hand, the transparency. The you're playing with open cards here. It's no black box or no secrecy about how you came to possess this data and to process it.
Hmm.
And on the other hand, the open source factor of it being just, yeah, have at it, be creative. It's I like the thought of it being a tool to creatives in whichever industry, in your case for at the moment pictures, but that is the opposite of how AI has been enrolled in the last 2 years as I've experienced it, or at least where it's
Right,
going
right.
towards.
And that's
Which
that's what I'm
is
saying from the spawning mission point of view. We're trying to
mm,
create the incentive to do it differently. If we
mm,
give you the tools, so putting together that data set was a lot of work, took a lot of time, took a lot of compute, a ton of storage.
mhm,
Hosting all of that data is very expensive. It's not something you can just throw on a jump drive, right? So, or a USB drive. Like
Yeah.
this is a large amount of information. It needs to be collected. It needs to be sorted. It needs to be cleaned up. And all of it is accessible through Source Plus. So Source Plus is the tool that we're using as the direct image access point. The PD12M data set is pulled from the collection that is Source Plus. But in Source Plus, that is a place where you can go in, search for different types of images. It's a very robust search engine. You can do a semantic search on it, or you can search the metadata, because the images that we pull in all have metadata from the museums where they come from. Each image that you click on has a right there on the side where its license is. You can click on the original source. Where did we pull that image from? You can verify it yourself. So all of that is very, very transparent. And then when you're in that space, the real goal is people love to fine tune. Talking on voice, people would try to fine tune a voice model. I mean, that's what 11 Labs is doing. Here, speak for a minute and we'll make a model on you, right? The base model on that is still a big lift.
Yeah, exactly. It's not
But
the minute I'm putting in there. It's the millions of hours of training data they've got as a basis to
yes,
reference and to put under your minute of input, right?
right. So that's why we're trying to do the foundation model. So if we have our own foundation model, that doesn't mean, because we've been able to fine tune. I've been fine tuning on my own artwork style to create my new AI art. I make all my own sketches, do my own drawings, take my own photos, and then train my own LoRa's, the fine-tuned model, basically a plugin that you can run with Stable Diffusion to get it to narrow in on a specific space in the latent space and give you consistent results of the thing that you trained. So that's cool. It looks like my stuff, but it's still running on the backbone of the Lion 5B trained model. So what we're trying to do with Source Plus and Public Diffusion is create a base model. So from beginning to end, you know that this wasn't trained on non-consenting data.
I mean, that sounds great. So Public Diffusion is the name of the foundation model you're training, right?
Yes.
What's in it for you as Spawning? Because you're not the Good Samaritans. I mean, you are, as opposed to big commercially oriented tech companies. But I mean, you have to finance that somehow. You have to. You put in thousands of hours and sweat and server space and whatever into that. So, I mean, is it just a toy for you, or how does that finance itself?
So Source Plus is really the kind of the commercial arm that we're building right now, because it is a subscription-based tool. So it's not very expensive. It's $10 a month right now for an individual user. So once you get into Source Plus, and again, this is why I love it for education, because it's essentially going into an image database. When you're in college, you have to go and you find journal entries to write your papers. And you usually go to the library and use one of their special databases to get your journal articles. So this is like that, very similar in the fact that, hey, I need to go and get images to train a model to use for my AI art class. So this becomes a safe place. You can go into it and you know that all of the images there are safe and ready to go. And they're very, very sortable, curatable, and collectible. So the idea of going into Source Plus, finding all of the different images that you might want to use for a fine tune, and then you build those into collections, and then those collections can then be exported. So it creates your own data set for you to train a model on. And then the public diffusion comes in when that goes online, that eventually you'll be able to fine tune on the site. So you can upload some of your own work. You can add to it from work that you found in the past. Like, how do my photos and Da Vinci drawings merge? What would that look like? And so you can build those two things together, still knowing where all of the content came from, fine tune a model, and then use the generative tool on site So just how you would go into Midjourney and you hit generate and it pops up an image in browser, it would be the same type of a thing where you could then go and actually generate your images through the web portal.
But with a good conscience, with
Yes.
a clear, with a peace of mind, so to speak.
And it's important to know that it's not trying to be a complete replacement to these other models. It's not as big. It's not going to be as knowledgeable as a Stable Diffusion or a Midjourney or a DALL-E or any of those. It is really good at giving results of what it knows, but think about it, it is what it has been trained on. So it hasn't been trained on celebrities' faces. If you ask it to give you an image of a famous celebrity, it will have no idea what that is because there's very few, if any of those. We have images from Wikimedia and there might be some celebrities that have snuck in there, but for the most part, it can't do that. It's not going to be able to do things that it hasn't been trained on. But there's a lot of content that it can do. And what we've seen is that the results are actually very tactile, very smooth and organic, because think about it, it's all of the high quality work of the past that's informing that versus a whole bunch of synthetic, anime data. Like, we don't have a lot of anime. If you're looking for anime, it's not going to work well.
Well, but what I'm hearing is actually interesting me even more, because there's little stuff more boring than this overly polished, like first glance at the picture, it's AI because it's just too much, it's too bright, too perfect, too whatever, and this sounds more like organic handcraft or and actually from a personality rights point of view, I think that's good that you can't let's call it by its name, deep fake whoever you want to deep fake and misuse it in thinkable and unthinkable ways, as we have seen in recent times. So actually, I think that's a plus.
Yeah, it can't really do that. It's not designed to do that. What it's really designed to do is help artists create fine-tuned models, because that's how you use AI to be intentional. When you're trying to use AI in like a professional workflow, I need to use this as a tool. I'm a working professional. I need it to be consistent. I have a very specific idea of what I want it to give me. That requires fine-tuning. And this is a really good machine for that, to create fine tunes. That's one of the main primary purposes. You can use a database of just the images, just searching through the images and using those as a starting point is also really interesting. So when you do image to image instead of text image, like, I'm going to start with this image and kind of use its composition and color space, but then try and push it into a different direction. So you can use images for that. But like I said, what we're trying to do is get it so that you create your collections of either your own images, which you can keep in private collections, nobody else finds them, or you can upload your own images and then put them into CC0. So that's that fair trade. Like, hey, I'm using all of these images that somebody else donated. It's really only fair that I donate some of my own too, back and forth. So then you can create these fine-tuned models, which allow you then to use your style, what you're looking for, to generate consistent results. So really an artist tool.
Yeah, that sounds like the maybe the original idea or sense or purpose, and then and somewhere along the way it derailed into total consumerism and total tech domination. I don't know, the commercial models, which we all know, but we won't name so they can't sue us.
Yeah.
No, but it sounds really interesting from a creative point of view, and bringing something to the table that helps me as a tool, as you said, and doesn't replace the creative thinking or the creative process. When are you planning on releasing this?
So right now we're at like the mid 30s on the training process. It's months long process of doing the training. And we're actually going to be trying to do some, there's a new method that just came out right now, essentially becomes a micro model. So it takes maybe a tenth of the cost to train it. It
Mhm.
isn't as robust, but the turnaround and the cost to do it is much lower. So we're trying to kind of run with that idea too, to create more versions of it, because we're still kind
Mhm.
of exploring what we're doing with it and what kind of results it gives. So even at the 33% mark, we're able to use it and generate with it. And it can do some very, very good images of what it knows, but it does very poorly at this moment with things that it doesn't know. When you try to ask for an anime character walking down the streets of Tokyo, it's going to have trouble with that because it doesn't know how
Mhm.
to blend an animated character. It doesn't hardly even know what an animated character, what anime is, because we don't have a ton of that in the data set. So what it knows, it can actually uh, produce some very interesting results, very clean, very
Mhm.
very passable results right
Is
now.
is that also the technique the new Chinese system has used for training, or is that a different thing?
I looked into it briefly. I'm not a developer, so I
Mm.
can't really get into the real back end on it. But I do know that it was different in that it was essentially trained to create its logic first and then fed the data instead of being fed data and figuring out the logic from it. So
Mm.
it's one of the things that people are marveling about is its reasoning, the way that it can think and kind of process through an image versus just trying to replicate what a typical response to that question would be. Its
Mhm.
logic is a little bit different. So I may be explaining that in slightly inaccurate terms, but from my understanding, that's how it worked. Is that it's actually trained in a different way, and by doing it that way, they needed less content to get it to a high level, which is why it was
Mm.
so cheap. So
Mm.
that's the kind of innovation that we can be expecting. Like that, the way they approach that is probably going to be the way that they need to go to get to that AGI level, the artificial general intelligence, the
Mhm.
model that does it all. Because right now we're
Mhm.
doing image models, but even in chat GPT or something like that, you can have images generated in your chat. So it'll eventually be that you can generate images, generate videos, generate audio. So that's when people are throwing around the words multimodal. Right now,
Mhm.
we're just because of scale and what's possible. We're only working in images with Source Plus. But the idea is that it's coming because we have all of these different ecosystems for video. We have ecosystems for audio, for images, for text. So those various companies and those various ecosystems could all be under threat from a larger AGI that would come out that could leverage the strength of each of those things, but put it all under one umbrella.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean the efficiency factor is also one of energy consumption, right? And server rooms and graphic cards you need to process all that, where these things aren't cheap and aren't we shouldn't use way more of that, even more at the moment where we're at right now, right? We should
Yeah,
make
I
it more.
read about that the other day that we're expected to go from 4% of our entire country's energy use for AI currently up to 6% in the next year and a half.
Wow, this is massive.
Yeah.
This is this is really massive. Like this is not cool. This is not. This is
That's
not,
actually a lot of power that's going into these systems for both training and then for utilization. And that's the type of stuff that also needs to see innovation.
Mhm.
AI is not simply a model. The infrastructure behind it is going to be something that we have to be watching very closely too. Like you said, the energy concerns, the carbon footprints, those things, they're going to be something we have to watch closely because either we figure out new ways of running the logic so that we don't need such intense computational processes, or we need to start figuring out how to power these things differently. That's what Stargate is. That's what the big infrastructure project is that they're trying to run, is to create initially 10 new data centers in Texas. So that's a large piece of the infrastructure. And a lot of that is we have to run main lines of power. So it's like we're altering the power grid around it in Texas to bring more power into these data centers because they consume so much. So there's
This is the famous 500 billion are going into the AI infrastructure that maybe our listeners and or viewers may have read and heard about recently.
yeah.
Right?
OpenAI is the one that is leading the way with this. So the first round, they actually have 100 billion raised, and they're supposed to raise the additional 5 in the next few years. So there's a bunch of different corporations that are partnering to create this new company. But OpenAI is going to be the one that has exclusive access to the data centers.
What? Wait a minute.
Right. So this big infrastructure project, it's a big government supported process to push innovation in the AI space. The recent DeepSeek model is definitely making people uncomfortable. Again, the markets kind of crashed when it came out because it immediately raced up to the number 1 slot on the Apple App Store. The way that it needed processor use was so much less that NVIDIA took a big hit. So like the markets are very unsure of what this means, which looks like now OpenAI and others, this is why there's a sudden push. We need infrastructure. We need to double down on this, and we need to deregulate it. So that's the other thing that President Trump has recently done is he's rolled back the kind of regulatory guidelines from the previous administration. So he's saying these things have been throttling innovation. This is a burden for companies. So we need to take that away.
Wow. Okay. But okay. That takes away my question of, is there something in for Spawning.ai or for a fair and ethical use case of AI in this 500 billion infrastructure massive investment? So
that's not an investment for all. That's an investment for some.
Okay, I see. That is well, everybody can form his or her own opinion on that.
Yeah. They can go and look it up. You can see all the different companies that are playing in it, but it's all the big hitters, Oracle, Microsoft, some of the others. Like those are all the major corporations that are partaking in this. And it probably is what needs to happen with the current models as they are to push them forward. But even in the official announcement, it even has in parentheses, the goal is still to achieve AGI, and this infrastructure project is necessary to try to get to that point. So there's a lot of people who are polarized on AGI as much as they are on AI too. Do we want an AI assistant in our life that can do all of these things in the real world, that can make orders online for us or send our emails or call our kids? Or, do we want to have something that
can
integrated?
That can think coherently on its own and make its own decisions with or without our consent.
And there's no new laws. There's really no new laws in the U.S. as far as AI goes. There's dozens that are being proposed, but they haven't gone anywhere yet.
And they probably won't, since President Trump is in office, since he rolled back of the few that were in place in the U.S. up until now.
And I shouldn't say that they won't all pass, because a lot of the legislation that's coming out is trying very hard to protect the public. So they're trying to do things as far as how AI is used by government agencies. How is it used by police? How can it be used to spy on people's privacy or invade their privacy? There's even a specific bill in place that they're proposing to make sure that AI is never linked to how nuclear missiles are launched. Like, we need to make sure that we never connect AI and nukes.
Yeah. Yeah. There's not many things that are essential, but this is probably one of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you said this is the way for things to progress and to is it though? Like, wouldn't it be better to dial back a notch and find ways more effective to progress and to initiate better outcomes, but on a fair and lawful basis, like you guys do, for example?
I would 100% agree with that. But that's also kind of saying, wouldn't it be nice if, say, capitalism wasn't racing so hard forward? Or wouldn't it be nice if we weren't in a technology arms race that was this intense with, say, China? How do you stop those things? You can bow out of them and say, well, we're not going to play anymore. We don't like this game. But I don't think anybody's willing to do that because that threatens economic dominance. It threatens all kinds of things on the market. It threatens where people are in the socioeconomic status. So it is not that dissimilar than other technologies that come around, in the sense that people want the newest, the best. They want to be the best and the experts, because that means that you have the largest capital advantage. But the difference being is that we're just playing with tools that are potentially a lot more powerful than we've been dealing with before. I'm going to date myself, but in the VHS beta era of which tapes to use, like VHS won out because people made VCRs from that worked a little bit better, and it was something that was rental better. So anyway, like the formats and the technologies that come forward, I don't think we're going to be able to see those things stop. It's one of the reasons why we are playing our hand in Europe right now, because the EU has a different sensibility than what America currently has, as far as the kind of their approach, or at least the mindset, right?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you because I know that you're also involved in the AI office's code of practice, as we are with UVA. What's in it for you? Like, I mean, I admire that, and I'm thankful for every player on the creative side of things that is involved in these hearings and in these makings of the code of practice, because there are also many from the industry side lobbying for deregulation and softening up the accountability and the transparency, and I don't have to tell you. So thank you for that. But how come?
So the EU is not a small market. It's a very, very large market. And the American companies, actually any kind of global company, will not ignore that market. So one of the things that we look at is, in the EU, there's a different approach. There's more interest in creating transparency on data source. There's already laws in place to prevent data mining, and so they're trying to expand that into AI scraping as well as data mining. And what they find is that if people are, or if, say, the EU, if policies go into place that prevent a company from operating in that jurisdiction because of certain things, or there is a specific guideline for how they must operate within that jurisdiction, it becomes something of a trickle-down effect, because it's inefficient to build two versions of something, one that runs in the US and one that runs in the EU. Well, it's a lot of extra work. Why duplicate it? So if you want to be in the EU, you would build your product to that specification. if that's the more strict version. And
Mhm.
that would just become your kind of system-wide approach. If you look at cookies on websites, it's that.
Mhm.
The US didn't actually require that on a website, that you acknowledge how your cookies are used, but
Ah, so you
all the websites are still there using that, because if you want to have a website that's accessible in the EU, then you have to do that. So it's just
mm,
easier to just say, okay, well, we'll just do that too, because we want
mhm,
to be able to be viewable in both places. We don't want to be liable in both places. So it's just, if we can kind of see that trajectory happen,
mhm,
that's why we're lobbying there, and we're trying to get opt-outs, get that machine readable standard in place. There is no
mhm,
standard yet, and that's what the work groups are about. They're trying to decide on what the opt-out standardization would look like. Um, what would it mean if there was a centralized opt-out registry? So,
mhm.
and who would control it, how it would be managed. I mean, there's all kinds of concerns and questions from a logistics side of things. And both the machine learning companies and the artists organizations are both lobbying on both sides. So they're trying to
Mhm.
find the middle ground where it doesn't become so burdensome that the machine learning companies are suing, saying you're basically just intentionally, shutting down our business. So they have to have their say in it. And it's trying to find that middle ground of saying, okay, you need to do machine learning. You don't actually want to make everybody angry. You just want to make your product. So how can we do it in a way that you can still get a good result, while all of these other rights holders can feel like they have control and say? So all of that is an evolving conversation. Um, we're working in those work groups. They're kind of closed door. We can't really talk about who else is in them.
Yeah.
It's all unofficial right now, because it's a lot of brainstorming. It's a lot of frank conversations, trying to work through how this works and where it goes.
Mm.
But the hope is that if we can establish a working model that the EU would adopt, that it would just be simpler for American companies to play by the same rules.
So there is a form of the Brussels effect, so to speak. What
Yes.
we hoped for in the EU AI Act, that regulating does have effects on foreign markets, and that is why you have some skin in the game here too, right?
Right. And that's exactly right. The Brussels effect, that was the term I was looking for before. That, because we're going to have so much lobbying in Washington going back and forth, I think it's unlikely that you will see bills being passed into law at a rate that makes them relevant for the current tools that are being released.
Hmm.
So the technology is being released faster than the laws could probably keep up with it right now. So the specifics on what that all looks like is going to be very mushy in the US legal system for a while.
Mm.
But if there are regulations in place in something like the EU, then companies will self-regulate in order to be applicable in those markets. So that's the hope, is that if you
Mm.
can create pressures or controls in certain areas, then you might see self-regulation from the AI industry itself.
Mm.
I was just
Mm.
reading in Forbes the other day about how this kind of deregulation that President Trump is trying to push
Mm.
is actually going to put the onus on the board members of companies much more so, because it's a lot easier for them. They would prefer to just say, give us the rules and we will abide by them. Just
Mhm.
give us what we need to do, and then that's what we'll do. But
Mhm.
when you say, um, we're not going to regulate you, just don't do anything wrong, it's much harder for the companies, because they now have to manage very closely all of their different risks. So they have to be worried about where, because they can still be sued, they can still run into problems. They still have the huge problem of the reputational risk. So all of those, if you're allowed to say, hey, it's perfectly legal, this is what the government said we can do and we're doing it, it's much easier to play that way than it is
Mhm.
to say, hey, we're in the Wild West and I guess we just did something really bad. So now we're completely responsible for that,
Mhm.
because now they have to, the oversight required at each company is going to have to increase, because the oversight from the government is decreasing. So it's
Mhm.
actually putting the burden back onto the companies to reevaluate all of their risks and reevaluate their protocols, because just because there's no regulations doesn't make them immune from the public.
Mhm. Yeah, and from existing laws, right?
Right, and
I mean,
existing laws too, yes. And the
it's
US has been using quite a bit of existing laws, telecom laws, um,
mhm,
data privacy laws, and
mhm,
they're just reapplying those now to AI. So they're trying to kind of use
mhm.
what's on the books and redefine a little bit about what the terms are.
This is funny because here we tend to think, well, this is a tech bro's wet dream, kind of to have no responsibility at all, no regulation at all. But it makes total sense, the argument you're bringing, that it takes away from the burden of self regulating because of everything you said. That
Right.
makes total sense.
And it still might be the tech bro's dream position, because the tech bro is the guy who's just trying to push things forward and make it happen and invent new and cool things.
Mm.
But the board of directors and the investors are going to have to now step up and say, okay, to protect our investments, we're going to need to watch you very closely to make sure that you
Mhm.
don't go too far.
Mhm.
So the deregulation for a researcher is great. The deregulation for an investor, maybe not.
And for a serious business owner
Yeah.
and yeah, employer and yeah,
And
yeah.
the trickle down to even the third party people who might be involved in this. Now your board members have to evaluate what they're doing. And now the clients who are buying your product now have to scrutinize what they're buying from you and scrutinize your company. If there's a
Mm,
large business to business purchase with services,
mm,
now those companies are going to have to look closer at each other's practices in order to make sure that they're all safe and secure, at
yeah,
least out of risk.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You told me that you have a kind of a do not train registry where I can register my own domain, my website, or insert my pictures, my data. Um, Tell me a bit about what effect does that have, or what can I, as an artist, expect from doing so?
So the Do Not Train registry is something that we've built, and then we go out and uh, connect that with willing AI training companies. So some of the big commercial models, not all, are willing to play along with that.
Mm,
And they're saying, hey, you've gathered all of this information. It's ready to go. We can just ping your API and pull all of that in real time. So if somebody just registered something yesterday, it will be in that new list of opt-outs.
mhm,
And so if we do another round of training, and that's why I said in the latest Stable Diffusion round, it was about 7 million images not included, um, because that registry exists, because we have an agreement with them for that to happen. Everything on the AI space right now, I shouldn't say everything, that's too inclusive, but most things right now are saying, or are existing through willing involvement or willing acceptance. There are no regulations that say the Do Not Train registry must be maintained,
mm,
but that's what the EU is talking about. That's what we're really focusing on right there, is to
mhm.
essentially take something like Have I Been Trained and make it an EU-wide registry that is required to be used for machine learning.
That's
So
what I
if
was getting at. Is that something you stride for, or trying to achieve?
we've already built the system and the mechanics for that,
Mm, mm,
and so we're trying to lead the way in the EU and saying, look, we have some expertise on how this works. We
mhm,
have expertise on how this exists, how to
mm,
connect with the public, and have our seat at the table when it comes to that data governance
mm,
conversation.
mm. I mean, if you
So
ask me personally, an active informed consent, so a proper opt-in system, would be the fairest and the best, so to speak, from an artist's point of view. But that what you're telling me about is the next best thing, probably.
right. And the opt-in systems are going to be more small scale.
Mm,
So Source Plus is an opt-in system.
exactly.
So
Mm,
if you want to upload your own artwork and put it into the collective, anybody can download those images and train a model with them. So you're saying, hey, I'm going to give my images out there. I'm willingly putting it there for the purpose of machine learning. So, but that's a single platform, right? So to try and push that industry wide, I think is unlikely.
Yeah.
But the do not train registry can apply to any kind of content. So that's something I think that people initially were looking at it only in the form of pictures. Are my images in the Lion 5B data set? Because Lion 5B is an image data set. That's what that's the only thing that's looking at. But the do not train registry or an EU central registry would be kind of data agnostic. It wouldn't matter what you were trying to opt out. So on ours, for instance, a lot of people go through and just simply register your domain. So you register your root domain of your website, and anything beyond that will automatically be opted out, no matter what it is. If it's your videos, your audio, pictures, your text. If the people who are doing the machine learning respect the opt-outs, everything beyond your URL will be opted out. Because the system in machine learning, it's just really important to understand that people don't actually have your content until they do the final download to do the training. I think there's still some confusion by a lot of people on what it means when they're in a data set. If somebody has the...
Give me that. I have found, for example, myself on the Lion 5B dataset. What does that mean? What can I do with this information? Can I get the images out? Like pretend I'm.
And that's the thing, is your images aren't actually in there. The URLs to your images are in there.
Okay.
So when you download the data set, it's just all text. The data set is simply a text where you have your link to the image and the caption for what that linked image is. And then when you do the web scraping, which is the difference between a crawler and a scraper, the scraper is the bot that is assigned by whoever's doing the training to say, okay, here's all the images that I need. Here's this portion of the data set or the entire data set. Now go and get them. So the bot goes out there and it's actually downloading the data for all of those pictures so that you can put them onto a server. It becomes a massive chunk of data again that people don't want to have to store all the time. They don't want to have to store these terabytes of images. So the scraper goes out, finds those images, downloads them, and then that becomes the training process. But your images aren't housed on some nefarious hard drive somewhere. It's the link to your image. So that image could be on social media. That image could be anywhere if you find your image there. But it's just that URL. So what we're doing as the Do Not Train registry is creating an updated list of every URL to ignore. So when you have the large data set list of URLs, it just simply searches through, finds the ones that match from the Do Not Train, and it just deletes them from the list. Then they go out and do their scrape as they normally would to go and fetch all the rest of the images. So if they were training on video or audio or anything, and they're respecting that, it's essentially just looking for those URLs for whatever the data happens to be and saying, oh, don't go to that URL. Don't use that.
So that is what the robots text and the AI text is basically for, to be
to be the warning sign on your website.
Sign, a border between the link to the URL in the Lion 5B dataset and the crawler that is
scraper, but yes.
Scraper, thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry.
So when your scraper comes in and sees AI.text, or the web crawler is for the robots.text, it's going in there, and if those bots are programmed to respect those pieces of code, it's saying, okay, I'm assigned to go and find this URL. I've looked at the URL. It is telling me to not look at the URL. I will come back and say no, and then go to the next one.
So even if it's not programmed to respect that, and this is not always the case. So there are fair game companies, so to speak, who respect that, and there aren't.
Yes.
Should I do it anyway?
It'll take you for the the half hour of work of setting it up, I think that would be useful.
Mm.
You know,
Mm.
I could think of a bunch of different analogies for it, but essentially you want to protect yourself in whatever ways you can if you're really concerned about that. I've interacted with people who are so upset that they essentially take all of their content offline.
Mm-hmm.
That's the ultimate way of protecting yourself from being scraped. Put
Yeah.
nothing online. And that's actually one of the things that I'm telling my own students in my classes is like, um, a lot of people are talking about what your digital footprint looks like as far as your social media goes and how that might come back to haunt you in the future. But I also tell artists to be conscious of what their portfolios are online. Be conscious of where you put your images. Because if you put your images on Instagram, when you sign up for Instagram, you go through their little terms of service and you say, I opt in for all AI training, agree. So,
Really?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, and other social media platforms are like that too. You got to
Mm.
go read through that very long and annoying
Mm.
terms of service. But
Mm.
you'll often find that as soon as you put it onto social media, that's almost across the board, that they can do what they want with those images.
Mm.
So,
At least in the US, because I remember that discussion. I've had it about LinkedIn, where in the US they had an automated opt-in for exactly what you're describing. And I, being a resident in the EU, just got a message. There is a new service, no worries, because of GDPR data protection in the EU. We're not going to apply it in the EU. You don't have to mind that. But yeah.
right. And so still comes down as if you are worried about your stuff being scraped,
Mm.
don't host it on a bunch of other third-party sites.
Mm-hmm.
That's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. Or, so like on a workflow as an artist point of view, you make more teasers, you make more little bits of things and drive traffic back to your own private URL
Mm-hmm.
where you can then protect that better.
Mm-hmm.
So some people have taken all this stuff offline. I think that's a bit of a Luddite extremist view of like, well, I'm not going to use the internet anymore. That's not really realistic. Or there's people who will put stuff more into password zones because if there's a password, the scraper can't get to it.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
I've had other people who go through and just rebuild their sites. So if they found their image in the Lion 5B data set, but they retool their entire website, so every image has a new URL identifier, that original link goes to nothing. So
Mm-hmm.
it will go and it will pull no image because that link is dead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So like there's ways that people are working to protect those things,
Mm-hmm.
but to just make it easier, putting things on like a do not train registry at the root level is a simple safeguard. It might not be respected by everybody, but wouldn't you rather be respected by some?
Yeah. Yeah. And have a proper handle on the ones who didn't respect it when it gets out through training data transparency laws, which also are part of the AI Act, for example, that will come into force in mid 2026, I believe. And I totally second your argument. I just wanted to make a case for our listeners here. I'm better prepared for having a simpler argument when I obviously, clearly, and unmistakably stated in a machine readable way that I don't want this to happen. So please, this is a very clear case in a class action or in a future
Right.
whatever law involving scenario, rather than I didn't do anything at all, and now I'm complaining that I've been
Right.
scraped.
So if you're trying to put the burden of proof of
Mm,
saying, I was trying to not be involved, I
mm,
made a good faith effort to try to not be involved, but I was still involved anyway, that, yes, it makes a much clearer argument down the road if you were to try to make a case against somebody.
mhm, mhm. And obviously, as a voice artist and representing in some form the voice artist community, I'm interested in: are you planning on expanding the registry on voice data sets, or what's your plans? What can you tell me
And
about?
that would ultimately come down to just simply recruiting the voice generative companies to get them to respect the same registry, because the URLs, again, doesn't matter what they link to. So if you have a bunch of voice samples on a website and they are linkable and they're hosted there, you can still put all that into the do not train registry. It's just now a matter of who are the AI voice companies and are they willing to respect that registry or not. Without there being any kind of legal mandate for those registries to be respected, it just comes down to how well can you convince one of these other companies to play along.
And it doesn't
So,
matter the form of data, whether text, image, video, audio is not relevant to the process or to the
no,
system.
having the registry of just saying these URLs should not be included in any machine learning process. Don't scrape anything at this URL. That's ultimately what it comes down to. So there's more nuance about what the machine readable versions would be, where it gets put into the website. Like AI.text is just this kind of add-on script, but there's other things like HTTP headers, different ways, like depending on how web savvy you are, to kind of wrap your site in clear protections. So it kind of depends on where the burden is on the tech companies, how much machine readable content they need. Is it simply enough to put an AI.text on there? That would be great, because you can do those like with a WordPress plugin, not too difficult. I made a little 5-minute training video and walks you through it. It's a pretty quick thing.
Oh, really? We
Yeah.
could link that in the show notes if you like.
Sure. So like the process of doing that would not be that hard. It's just now a matter of, can we get the other side, the other party, which is the training companies, to respect it. So voice, whatever, again.
Yeah.
So don't think about it only, have it been trained as an image searching tool, but because that's what it's looking at as Lion 5B, but you can actually still add things to the do not train registry by going to your account. There's also a browser extension. So if you're using Chrome, I think we have one for Firefox too, I think. But I know for sure for Chrome, you can just make it as a browser extension. So on any given page, you can pop it up and look for whatever the images are on that page or whatever URLs you want. And then you can just click and add those as you go. So that's a really useful way of going into social media. So if you're relatively well known and people are reposting your work on their Instagram accounts or in Pinterest or whatever, and it's hosted in other places, you can still go and opt out your images on their accounts because there's still a distinct URL that goes to that image.
But this, yeah, I wanted to get to this because as a self-employed creative worker, I also give my work out of hands, and with that, I lose control to the client, who may post it on Instagram, who may put it on their website, who has no robots text or AI text on it. It's a possibility where I can still get a little form of control when I know there is a published version of my work. I could go there, link the URL, right?
Yes.
Did I get
Yes.
that correctly?
Right. So if you went in and you wanted to add that image, you gave it to a client, the client puts it onto their most recent projects page. You could go and click on the link to your image or your content there and then add that to the do not train registry.
Wow.
So, but I think a lot of people also think that they want to be pulled out. I get emails all the time from angry artists saying, "You have my content. You're stealing my art. Get it out of there." And I'm like, well, we're not the ones hosting this. We're actually the ones on your side. And two, we can't remove it from the model. Nobody can remove it from the model. The model is released It's out there in the wild and people are using it.
Mm-hmm.
Your data that was included in that is part of that model forever. There's no way to get it out of a model. What you can do, so if you have been trained, you have been trained. There's no
Mm-hmm.
way to delete yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But what you can do is prevent yourself from being trained again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's why in the Lion 5B data set, because people were reusing that, it's such a big data set, it gets reused and reused by different training companies.
Mm-hmm.
So by going through and saying, okay, I found my 10 images on Lion 5B and I want them all to not be trained on. Okay. So when people are reusing that common data set, they won't be using those images. But by
Mm-hmm.
adding your images to a do not train registry, even if they aren't on Lion 5B, you're trying to future proof yourself and say,
Mm-hmm.
so when the next common crawl happens, and that's how the first step is common crawl goes out and it finds images. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
here's where those images are. And then a company like Lion will take and say, hey, we have this huge list of images. Let's go and find those images and then use clip to caption them. And then we put all of that into a nice little package that somebody who's a data scientist can download and train a base model from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm getting probably into the boring technical side of things.
No, yeah, I love that because it's a bit overwhelming, but it helps me understand the process better, and I find it fascinating that people write you or spawning in that regard, making you trying to make you accountable, hold you accountable for things that happened probably 10 years ago by somebody totally different and under
Yeah.
totally different circumstances.
Well, they find their picture on Have I Been Trained, and they're like, you have my picture, get rid of it. And I'm like, no, Have I Been Trained is just linking to your own website and saying, yes, this image
Yeah.
from your website is in their data set.
Yeah.
But anyway, fine. I explain it.
Yeah, I think it's educational, right? It's an educational process, and yeah, you probably have to answer the same questions again and again.
I've been teaching for 20 years, so I'm well accustomed to answering questions.
Okay. Well, Kurt, I think this is a good place to wrap it up and to maybe I know this is probably the hardest question to ask, but maybe a little forecast, a foreshadowing of what do you think the next developments in the next year or so will be in the AI space, from your
Well,
personal opinion?
for me, because I teach filmmaking, so and motion graphics, so
Mm.
I'm very interested in the time-based stuff that's coming out.
Mm.
And I think that that's going to shift uh, cultural things even more than images did, because we are kind of getting used to that idea of like, oh, that looks pretty AI. We can kind of just look at that image and it has a certain kind of either plasticiness or glossiness or something like that. And it's really great for memes, and we're very used to seeing those things thrown around. The
Mm.
new video models that are coming out are getting longer, so that it used to be you can only do 3 seconds, and now
Mm.
it's 10, and you can extend it, and it's getting longer and more robust. You can start controlling more content within it. So I want this piece to move and that piece to move and so on. I think as those models come out, um, that's where we're going to see a lot of growth, because if you can do an image generation model, you might as well generate an image and then animate that image. And then you mix that with, there's multiple AI voice avatar tools. I need to have a talking head for my HR training video. I don't
Mm.
want to hire somebody for this. I will just simply use the you know Elizabeth voice on this web avatar, and it will do my HR training session for me. So when you have a company like Hedra, does really great lip sync, has some interesting voices there. You can also train your own voice to do that. Um, Now you get in that complete package, and that's why I'm talking about the multimodal stuff. I think we're going to see more and more of that as people push to AGI. I think we're going to see more robust mixtures of these things, image to video mixed with lip sync. Right now, you can do all of that, but it's multiple steps and it's multiple platforms to get it to that point. I think the people who are going to be able to collate some of those services into a single package are going to start leaping ahead.
Okay. Well, food for thought for the dubbing industry, for example.
Well, and that's why I brought up on the voice side of things. There's a lot that's going on in that space. And I don't know if you've looked at Hedra, Hedra, or not.
I've heard about it, but I didn't bring up the the inner strength to look at it properly.
Right, and you can leave it out of the podcast if you want, but Neural Vision is a YouTube channel that might be worth checking out. I think it's called Neural Vision. So he releases a film every week, and he's creating this kind of alien race that exists thousands of years after humans go extinct. But it's really well done. The image generations come out of Midjourney, and then he's animating them, and then he's using Hedra to do these lip syncs. So it's very convincing, and they're using their own audio files. So you can look at that as also a case for, they give you 3 pre-programmed AI voices, but this Neural Vision web channel is really successful because they're still acting, and the facial expressions on the characters are reflecting the emotions of the voice that's uploaded.
Okay, great.
So he's got his friends coming in, and there is recurring characters as the voices, but now there's a way to animate to the voices instead of trying to get the voice to match the animation. So it's like reverse dubbing,
Okay.
which is not uncommon in animation in general. You would lay down your audio tracks, and then the keyframe animator would go through and like, okay, we needed to make it look like what that voice is doing. If they're shouting, they need to look like they're shouting.
Exactly. Yeah.
But this is trying to do that in an automated way. So you could argue that there's AI tools coming out that will leverage the voice actor instead of destroy the voice actor. But you need to be ready to dance. You need to be ready to jump around into different platforms and make a case for yourself.
Okay. Yeah, I see.
Nimbleness.
Okay, yeah, I will check it out. And after I have checked it out, I will consider whether we leave that in or not. Anyway.
I'm not trying to endorse it, but I've definitely played around with it. Just uploaded a picture of myself, typed in a little limerick, and it's convincing in a kind of almost disturbing way.
Yeah. Disturbingly good.
So much of where we're at on the limit right now is simply on hardware. And that's the other thing. NVIDIA just came up with a new chip that is specifically designed to be tailored to AI. So it'll come out in a laptop. You can be running AI processes on your laptop a lot more easily, a lot more efficiently. So when hardware comes out to support these things, and that's the give and take. Like AI is only as good as its data and its processor. Give it better data, give it better processors, and we don't really see a limit on where it's going to go as long as those two things increase.
Yeah. The only difference being that developers and tech companies are willing to pay fortunes for the tech and nothing for the data. That is.
Yep.
Maybe that's a good place to end. Kurt, I've enjoyed it immensely talking to you. You've brightened my horizon and opened my mind about a couple of things. Thank you very much for taking the time. I hope you enjoyed it too.
I always enjoy talking. I'm a lecturer, right? So I talk all the time.
Great. And to you out there, thank you for staying with us and hope you enjoyed it too. If you have a message me at deeptalk@mike-rider.com. And so long, until next time. Bye-bye.